Thank you for purchasing this Spencer Ogg sewing pattern. The sew along follows directly after this introduction video where you can see the features of this bag and the wonderful creations made by the pattern testers. Hello bag builders, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns, here to introduce you to my new sewing pattern for the Mighty Mini Crossbody foam bag. It's a little bag of happiness. It's a moderately easy pattern. The pattern is instant download and comes with full written instructions, detailed colour photos and full-size computer drafted pattern pieces which print onto A4 or US letter size paper. There's also a sew-along video to take you step by step through your creation. And as with all my patterns, it's designed to be made happily on a domestic sewing machine. Itty bitty foam bags are the height of fashion at the moment, but I wasn't sure there would be enough space or pockets for my essentials other than just a phone, so I thought, you know what, I need to design one. The Mighty Mini is a crossbody bag that measures approximately 18.5 by 11.5 by 2.5 centimetres. That's 7 1/4 inches by 4.5 inches by 1 inch depth. Designed for light to medium weight fabrics, the Mighty Mini Crossbody introduces an ingenious folding and stitching technique which forms an elegant firm back spine, which not only looks good but also adds strength, support and structure to the bag and creates an accessible slip pocket on the back as well as a secret inner card pocket. Inside is a second credit card pocket and plenty of space for your phone as well as keys and lipstick. The crossbody strap can be made of webbing or you can make your own. I offer a variety of adjustable strap options to suit every taste, including fixed, removable and even rivet on. The front flap closes with a magnetic snap or with a twist lock, and the pattern has built-in strengthened areas to add your clasps. And although it's mini, it's also mighty, hence the name. It holds so much more than just your phone in its compact super cuteness, and because I know you love your pockets, I managed to squeeze in a total of 3 pockets along with the main interior compartment. A slip pocket on the back for items you need accessible. Under the flap is a hidden credit card or cash pocket that holds a number of cards. Inside is a slip pocket for credit cards, again holds a number of cards, and the main compartment itself is large enough to hold your phone, passport, glasses, keys and maybe even a lipstick too. Make it practical and simple or customise it to your heart's content. It's great for men or for women. Instructions on how to quilt the body are also included to give it an extra glamorous look. There's a lot of opportunity to play and experiment with this pattern. Just look at some of the variations my brilliant testers came up with. Aren't they gorgeous? And that's just my testers. Add quilting, applique, embroidery, rivets, make them up in light to medium weight fabrics including things like quilt weight cotton, waterproof canvas, oilskin, canvas and denim. The Mighty Mini Crossbody sewing pattern is available now as an instant download PDF on my website or on Etsy or by clicking on the link below this video. For more Spencer Ogg patterns, why not pop over to spencerogg.com, sign up to my newsletter to be the first in the know with any new patterns, tutorials and general Spencer Ogg news. I always love seeing your Spencer Rug creations, so please do join our welcoming and helpful Facebook group to show off your makes, ask questions and find bag making advice. I can also be found on Instagram and even now on TikTok. All the links can be found below this video. And of course, here on YouTube, you will find lots of free patterns and tutorials to keep you inspired. That's enough chat. Are your creative juices flowing? Well, let's go sew. So if you're ready, let's start making our mighty mini crossbody foam bag. The seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch all the way through unless otherwise stated, and it is included in the pattern pieces. You don't need to add anything on. Read through the whole pattern and choose from the different closure methods and different strap options before you begin. Things we're going to need: first of all, an outer fabric. So anything light to medium weight, such as quilt cottons, waterproof canvases, oilskin, canvas and denim. As I say, anything light to medium weight is great. For the lining, I'd just recommend a quilt cotton or other lightweight fabric. We're also going to need a fusible interfacing, a medium weight fusible interfacing. So it can be woven or non-woven, such as Violin F220, G700 or a Pellon SF101. Don't use foam for this project, it really is too bulky. And if you are using things like oilskin and waterproof canvas, you don't need any interfacing at all. It's really just for things like quilt cotton, denim and canvas. You'll also need some ultra firm stabiliser, fusible stabiliser, and I'm using Decaville Heavy in this project. You could also use Pellon 71F as a substitute, but we do want that firm leather-like feel, so it's just going in the flap. So other things we're going to need are either a magnetic clasp, 18mm or 14mm is fine, or you can use a twist lock. Today I'll just be using a magnetic clasp. And you'll need all-purpose thread to match, some 3/4 inch webbing, and I really love this nylon seatbelt webbing. It is ideal for this project. It's got some sort of weight to it, it's not too flimsy, it supports itself, but you can use cotton or polyester or anything you can get hold of, but it's a 3/4 inch wide. So I'm going to be making a fixed adjustable strap today, but there's instructions in the pattern how to make a removable strap as well. So like me, if you're making the fixed adjustable strap, what you'll need is 1 tri-glide and 1 rectangle ring in 3/4 inch width. If you do want to make the detachable strap, you'll need 2 3/4 inch swivel hooks and 2 1/2 inch D-rings. They are different sizes, and you won't need the rectangle ring. Optional items: if you want to quilt the body of your bag, so if you're just using quilt cotton or something very light, you could quilt the body of your bag, and there's instructions in the pattern how to do that. So for that you would just want a very low loft fleece, we don't want much bulk at all. So it's something like Violin X50, which is this, it's very handy because it's got a grid already on there that you can follow with your quilting, or Violin H630 or Pellon 987F. Optionally, you can add a logo badge or a handmade badge, and a little double-sided tape doesn't go amiss. So that's everything we need. So just a few tips for this pattern before we start. Cut as accurately as possible. It makes a big difference to any project. Leave your pattern pieces pinned to your cut pieces, or use the handy labels included to easily identify the cut pieces. As I mentioned before, there's no need to interface your outer fabric if you're using firm fabrics such as waterproof canvas or oilskin. I'm using waterproof canvas today, so I don't need to interface that. But I have interfaced my quilt cotton lining. Mark any notches shown on the paper pattern pieces with either a notch or a snip, within the seam allowance, so that means less than the width of the seam allowance, or less than 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. We don't want to see them after the bags are made up. Feel free to use vinyl or cork for the outer body piece A of the bag, and no interfacing would be required on that, but choose lighter fabrics for the flap and spine, piece C, to keep the bulk to a minimum. The back spine has Decaville inside it and it has several layers, so it's safer not to build that up. So I would say just stick with quilt cottons or thinner fabrics for the flap itself. Obviously there's exceptions to every rule. I say not to use vinyl for the flap, but I have made some, but I have used very, very thin vinyl. It's not a bulky vinyl or a firm vinyl at all, just a very flexible thin one, and that works successfully. But in general, stay away from the thicker vinyls for the flap. If you prefer to make your own crossbody strap rather than using webbing, there's instructions at the end of the document with additional fabric requirements needed there too. For help with choosing fabrics for your project, do take a look at my video, Fabrics for Bag Making. It's on the YouTube channel and I'll add a link in below. It's not too bad for layers, this one, but if you do want to reduce bulk further, you can trim interfacings out of your seam allowances before you start too. If you're using a printed fabric, choose a non-directional design. It is such a small project that after experimenting, I decided to avoid putting extra seams at top of the flap and bottom of the bag, as they just add too much bulk. Backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam, I'm sure you always do. Trim loose threads as you go to keep your project tidy. Press at every stage for a really smart finish at the end. And always use a pressing cloth if you are using vinyl or cork, or if you have something with a coating. If you do wish to quilt the outer body fabric for this neat little bag, there is a tutorial in the written document. Quilting your fabric is suitable only for lightweight fabrics and just for the body piece, not for the flap. It'd be too thick. As I say, stick with a very low loft fleece for that. And because quilting does reduce the size of the fabric slightly, it's preferable to quilt before cutting out your pattern piece. But again, all those instructions are in the written document. So go ahead and print off all your pattern sheets in Adobe Reader. Make sure that the box actual size is definitely ticked and there's no shrink to fit or fit to page ticked. We don't want your printer shrinking the size of the pattern pieces. There is a 2.5 centimetre or a 1 inch control square printed on the pattern as well for you to check your size before cutting. If you need any help with opening and printing PDF patterns at the right size, I've got a video on my YouTube channel to show you how to do that. I'll put a link in above here and there's a link in the instruction document. So cut your chosen fabrics and fuse as directed. Some pieces are fused before we start and some are held back. So just follow the document, and if you've got everything cut and you're ready, let's make a start. Today I'm going to be using waterproof canvas for the outer. It's nice and firm, so I don't need to add any interfacing to the back, and I'm using quilt cotton for the lining, which I will be using medium weight fusible interfacing on the back of. So our first operation is to prepare the outer flap. So take your outer flap and spine, piece C, and your corresponding medium weight interfacing, piece C. Now because I'm using waterproof canvas today, I don't need the interfacing, but on the interfacing just slice 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the bottom straight edge. Clip the corners a little bit just to reduce bulk in that bottom straight edge, and then fuse them together on the reverse, and then you're ready to go. So I'm going to place that piece C right side up. I'm going to pin the pattern piece back onto it because we just want to make sure those notches are in the right place. You might have already made the notches. If you have, that's absolutely fine. So I'm just going to pin that so it's in exactly the right place. I'm going to add a notch or snip within the seam allowance at each line X and Y on each side of the panel, using the paper pattern piece as a guide. And this is going to make it really easy to fold into place accurately on the next step. So small snip. X and Y. Okay, and you can take that off. Just lay them side by side. I'll show you on the paper pattern piece first, just so you can see it easily. So I'm going to head to the ironing board. I'm going to lay the panel with the right side up, and using the notches and the paper pattern piece to help, pinch at line X, this one, and lift to meet line Y. Okay, so I'll do that again. So your line X, fold at line X and pinch it up so it falls on line Y, and that will form your card pocket or your slip pocket on the back. Okay, so hold that there. So line X, I'm going to fold at line X. I don't need the iron because I'm on waterproof canvas, so I can just fold it neatly. Just fold that next to it, and then I'm going to fold that up to meet line Y, and I can see line Y by the notches on the side. There they are somewhere. There we go. And I fold that into place. Obviously take some time pressing that nicely and make sure it's absolutely square. Now I just want to top stitch the pocket top. So I'm going to lift that away. I don't want to stitch through the lower fabric, I just want to stitch through the top pocket. And I'm going to stitch close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch or 3mm from the edge. I've put a blind hemming foot on my machine, which always helps me to sew accurately. That's top stitch, so I can fold that back into place. You can do a second line of stitching as well to give it the appearance of twin needling. Trim up all the time, trimity trim. Fold that back into place. I'm going to clip the sides, and then I'm going to baste the sides just to hold everything in place. So I'm going to baste that within the seam allowance just so nothing moves. See, that's nicely in place. Now pocket's been formed. So now I'm going to flip that over to the back after snipping, obviously. Flip it over to the back, so you're now on the reverse of the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to grab my Decaville piece E. So on this nice curved edge, lay the Decaville glue side down. Get rid of this now. The Decaville is slightly smaller, and that's to keep it out of the seam allowances. So we want to position it so it sits centrally, leaving a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch border all the way around the sides and that top curve of the flap. Okay, so I'll go and fuse that into place. Yeah, so I've fused that to the back. So you can see a border all the way around the top end of the flap, or the curved edge of the flap, without interfacing. So we can put that to one side for the moment. And now we'll prepare our flap lining. So grab piece D in your lining fabric and in your interfacing. So on this medium weight interfacing, just as I did with the flap, or I didn't because I was using waterproof canvas, but I'm just going to trim 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from this short straight edge. So it's not the curved edge at the top, it's just this bottom straight edge. This is just to reduce bulk. I'm going to snip my corners off as well. You don't have to be terribly accurate. So I put the board down, hoping you can see that a bit better. Just that little bit there, it does make quite a big difference. So I've actually already fused this piece with my interfacing just to save time. And at this point we're going to add our clasp. Now I've chosen to use a magnetic clasp today, and there's instructions that say for a twist lock closure in the pattern as well. So I'm going to take the male half of my magnetic snap and just a seam ripper. I'll use a pen so you can see it. Obviously use chalk or a disappearing pen. So I want to mark this 3.5 centimetres or 1.5 inches from the top curved edge. So just to make sure it's central, I'll just fold that in half to start with. I fused a small piece of Decaville to the back there just to give it a little bit of added strength. I'm going to measure down 3.5 centimetres if I'm going to do it on the back, just in case. So there's my mark. I'll measure one side to the other just to make sure it is even. Yes, it is. Grab a washer, place it on the dot. Mark through the washer, and then I can use my seam ripper just to slit along those lines. If you're worried about slitting too far, you can use the old trick of putting a pin in at the end just to stop your seam ripper going too far. Okay, so flip to the front, grab your male half. That's the one with the sticky out bit. Why is it called the male half? And push that through. Over to the back and washer on. I always push them outwards. The choice is yours to go outwards or inwards. Outwards gives you a flatter silhouette, but maybe isn't quite as strong as inwards. But I've never had one come out, so there we go. That is my magnetic clasp attached. I do have a full blog tutorial on that as well. If you need full instructions, there's a full photographic blog tutorial on it if you just head to my website. So now we'll join the outer to the lining. So I'll pick up my flap again, my outer flap. I'm going to lay those right sides together. So I'll turn it round. That's the problem with working upside down. So I'm going to clip that all the way around, make sure it's beautifully aligned. Check the back. Then I'm going to stitch all the way around the panel using a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to leave a 10 centimetre or 4 inch turning gap just above the top of the slip pocket. So here's the top of the slip pocket. Just have a look inside to make sure you can see where it is, but basically you've got a little notch there anyway. But starting just above here, or at the bottom of the Decaville, and leave yourself a 10 centimetre or 4 inch turning gap. Just say I'm using a ballpoint pen so you can see it. Do use chalk or something that will disappear afterwards. So I'll stitch that, and when you're stitching around the top of the curve you can use the Decaville as a guide, so you want to be stitching directly just a fraction outside that Decaville, and take your time on the curves because that's going to show obviously. If you do if you haven't done a lot of curves before and you need some help with the curves, again there's also a tutorial on my YouTube channel and some sheets that you can print off to practice curves on too. So I'll start here, all the way around, back up to here. Back stitch beginning and end. There we are, so I'm stitched all the way around. You can go back if you're not happy with it. Make sure you're nice and close into that deckerbill, because the closer you are, the better it'll look when you turn it through. So I'm just going to nip to the ironing board and I'm going to press that seam open, because it will really help to get a nice crisp edge when we turn it through. So there we are, I've pressed that seam open at the turning gap. And now we want to clip our curves. Nice and close to the stitching, just around the curved edge. Make sure I've got around there. So once they are clipped, I can now trim around this top edge, just around the curve. You can leave the sides as they are, and I'm going to trim this bottom edge as well. So I'll do the curve first. Leave yourself a safe distance, we don't want to pop any seams later. Obviously don't trim particularly this seam, because you're going to need that afterwards. And then I'm just going to head to the bottom edge and I'm going to clip the corners from the bottom edge. Nice and tight. You do need to reduce bulk in these bottom corners, so just take a little extra. Along there. You can trim this seam or you can leave it, depending how bulky your fabric is. This is fine. And then we're going to turn that through. So in through there, I find it's easiest to turn the pocket through first, so just push the pocket upwards through the gap. Try not to let your deckerbill pop off. I've only lightly fused this one on because obviously it's waterproof canvas. Use a non-pointy tool, chopstick or something similar. You don't want to push anything through. I'll use my fingers first. And then I'll head to the flap and carefully turn that through. A bit at a time. Don't come off deckerbill. Now I can get a nice smooth edge with my non-pointy tool. Okay, that's nice. And then that certainly needs a good press again now. I've rumpled it everywhere, so I'm going to head to the ironing board again and press it all nicely back in place. Make sure that deckerbill is fused on again perfectly. So there we are, looking a lot better. Perfectly pressed. So just put a clip in the side there. Just one thing to mention when you are pressing this, by the way, I should have mentioned it before I went to the ironing board, is don't press over the back of your magnetic clasp. Two reasons. One, it can mark your fabric, but two, something I didn't know until one of the testers mentioned it to me earlier, was that it can actually demagnetize your magnetic snap. So another good reason not to iron over the back of it or the front. So there we are. All we need to do now is top stitch it. So I'm going to top stitch the sides and the top. I'm not going to top stitch onto the pocket. I'm going to begin at the top of the pocket, over the top, and then back down. So 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. If your lining is a different colour to your outer, then you might want to change your bobbin thread as well. So let's top stitch that. I've put the blind hemming foot back on my machine so I can stay an equal distance from the edge. There we go, trim that up, and that will have closed up your turning gap as well. Just double check it has, yes. If you're not confident with sewing top stitching curves, then use a thread that matches rather than a contrasting thread, and it really doesn't show up very much anywhere. But if you're great with sewing curves, make a feature of it. So as I say, we've just started there, around the top, and finished there. So now we're ready to lay that to one side and start working on our lining. So we're going to start with the pocket, and that's piece F. So this is our inside slip pocket. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to press a 1 centimetre hem on both short edges. So there we are, I've pressed a hem, top and bottom, on the short edges. Now I'm going to fold it in half with the right sides together. So I'm going to match up those two hems, clip it in place. I've put a regular foot back on my machine as well. I don't want the blind hemming foot on anymore. So there we go. So make sure it's lined up nicely, both sides. And then I'm going to stitch a 1 centimetre hem on each of the sides. 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. There we are, trim up. You don't want any loose threads. These are the ones at the bottom that you always find later that you can't get to the bottom of. So now I'm just going to turn that through. You don't need to trim this pocket at all. Poke the corners out gently. Again, I'll take that and give it a quick press. So there we are, there's my pocket done, same back and front. So I want to attach that to my lining now, so grab your lining piece B. Make sure you have cut out those little notches at the bottom because they're going to form your box corners, tiny as they are, they're important. So just open that out. And on one side I'm going to attach my pocket. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to top stitch the edge first, I forgot that. I'm going to put my blind hemming foot back on the machine again. I like to get an exact distance. Nearly forgot that. So on the folded edge of the pocket, not on the open end, I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil from the edge. And I'll trim that up. And then I'm going to lay it onto my lining panel. So open out your lining panel. This will end up as the back, the one we're putting the pocket on. And I'm going to fold it in half just to make sure I've got it central. I'm going to lay the pocket on 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches down from the top short edge. And you've got the top stitched side of the pocket. Should have done that first, it would have been nicer pressed. So I'll grab a ruler. So make sure it's central, fold both in half. Yeah. And 1.5 inches down or 4 centimetres is up here. There we go. Put a pin in that so it doesn't move. That's your open edge at the bottom. Still, we're going to close that as we stitch it on. So I'm going to stitch down the side, bottom and back up this side, leaving the top open for the pocket. 3 mil or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. There we are. You can always give that another press just to get rid of any pin marks. Trim up. And that's our lining finished. So we can place that to one side and we're ready to start work on our outer. So let's start work on our outer body piece A. So you've cut that on the fold. Make sure you cut your notches out at the bottom because we'll need those for boxing our bag corners shortly. And I'm just going to work on the front to start with. So if you do have a preference, if you've got a printed fabric, this is the front of the bag that we're going to be working on. So I'm going to grab my Decaville for body piece G and also a little bit of Decaville that I want as a strengthener. So I'll do that first. I want to add a badge, so I'm just going to add a little bit of Decaville to strengthen the back of the fabric just so I can push that on. So I'll flip it over. I'm going to measure 6 inches down or 15 centimetres. Make sure that's central across the piece. I don't have enough room for my ruler. And I'll add that centrally there for my badge. And then I'm also going to add my Decaville at this point. And glue side down, place that on the top straight edge. So this is going to be the front still, so if you added a badge, make sure it's the same side. And I want to position that 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch down from the top straight edge and centrally across the piece. So I'll head to the ironing board and I'll fuse those in place. So I fuse those on and I'm going to add my badge. So I've just marked that 6 inches down, again 15 centimetres on the back of there, added my washer, made sure that my prongs are going to be in the right place, and measured them and marked through my washer. So I'll just use my trusty seam ripper. Flip it over, get my badge on, hopefully the right way around. That one needs a little bit of extra. Hopefully that's straight, I'll just check that. More or less. And then washer back on. Confusing these washers because there's an extra hole in them, so you're longer on one side. I don't know what the etiquette is supposed to be for applying them in terms of whether the prong should be in or out. I tend to just do them outwards. And that's our badge attached. And then I'm going to stitch around my Decaville. So on the wrong side, I'm going to stitch around the sides and bottom of this Decaville close to the edge. So actually stitching on the Decaville this time. So just 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the top, across the bottom and up the other side. And that will also form a profile stitch rectangle on the front of the bag. There, so you can see, hopefully, it forms that profile stitch rectangle on the front of your bag. So do it in contrast thread if you like. If you're worried about keeping absolute straight lines, then do it in matching thread and nobody will ever know anyway. Trim my bits and pieces. Now this serves two purposes. One, obviously it gives an attractive little profile stitch effect there, but also it gives us a really firm base to add our chosen closure clasp later on, so you don't need to add any extra strengthener later on. Now you can in fact add a little extra decoration within that rectangle box if you want to, like I've done on this gold one. So a little extra profile stitching is quite nice. It just gives a little added surprise when you open the bag, but you do need to stay within that rectangle because otherwise you will see the stitching coming out, peeping out under the flap when you close it, and you want it concealed under there. So that's our outer front completed. Now we want to work on the outer back. So I'm going to turn that around. So we're going to be working on the section that doesn't have anything on it, not the section that has the decaville and the badge. So that's the front and this will be the back. So we want to add our flap onto this. So grab your completed flap and spine unit. And I've actually put a pin in this. So I've measured down 10.5 centimetres or 4¼ inches and just put a pin in the side just to remind me where that is. And I'm measuring from the top of the curved flap. And I want to position it on the back of my bag. So I've got both pieces with right side up. I'm going to take this and position it centrally across the back so that 10.5 centimetres or 4¼ inches of the curved flap is sitting above the body panel. So our rectangular pocket is sitting fully on the back of the bag and the curved edge of the flap is sitting above it. So place it centrally. That little pin has really helped me to position it. That's at 10.5 centimetres or 4¼ inches above the short straight edge. And I'm going to clip that in place. I'll just double check that I am central. Well, not me particularly, but the flap, hopefully. We're looking about right. So I'll just clip that in place at the top for now. Very carefully, I don't want to move it. You can put a little bit of double-sided tape just at the very bottom if you want to. So now I'm going to top stitch the sides and the bottom of this flap unit, but just onto the pocket section, starting and finishing 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch above the pocket opening. So from here to here. And it is important to back stitch at the beginning and end, obviously, because that is a point of stress when you're opening the bag. So I have my trusty blind hemming foot back on the machine. There we are, so I can take these off now. Trim up any loose ends. So that's your flap now attached. Now, if you want to, you can add a couple of rivets in there as well, just for extra strength, but literally they do need to be directly above that pocket top. We don't want them up here because we want the movement in the flap. Now, if you turn that over, you'll find that that's actually created an extra little pocket under the flap too for credit cards. So that's our outer panel completed. We're now ready to join outer to lining. So grab your lining panel again to place your outer body and your lining right way up. So with both panels right way up, just fold your flap down out of the way. You want to keep that well out of the way of our seams at the top and bottom. And I'm going to flip my lining onto my outer. So the pocket of the lining should be sat on top of the flap of the outer, because we want that at the back of the bag. And I'm going to clip the top edge there at the top seam. And you'll notice that the lining is quite a bit shorter than the outer itself. That's because we don't want any bagginess in the bag. It's also shaped in slightly into the centre where it is at the bottom. And I'm going to clip the lower edge too. And then I'm going to stitch across with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance, top and bottom. I'm cold here, I've got goose pimples. There we go, stitched both ends, and now I'm just going to trim that up I just want to reduce the bulk in the corners of this seam allowance. Top and bottom. And then I'm going to take that to the ironing board, turn it through. I'm going to press those seams nicely. So we've got a nice sharp, crisp edge on the top. So there we go. Sorry, I've had to put a jumper on. I know it's no good for continuity, but it's freezing here today. So I've pressed my bag and I'm going to top stitch these edges, these short edges, and they will form the top edges of our bag at the end. So with our flap still out of the way, I'm going to top stitch the first one, but I only want to top stitch it within an inch or 2.5 centimetres of the edge on each side. So I'm going to draw a line just to remind me, because I'm very good at forgetting. Both sides. Bits of chalk everywhere. Now top stitching can be done at the end rather than at this point, after the bag is fully completed, and at that point you can achieve a full circle, but it's very fiddly because it's such a small item and it's so small it doesn't even fit on the free arm of a machine, so you kind of got to do it from inside or turn it inside out and do it from the right side. So I find it's easier to do it this way and just leave the edges unstitched. Again, you could just go over them at the very end just to do that last portion, but once you've actually got the seam on there, it's a very little gap anyway. So I find it looks absolutely fine without the extra top stitching, and it makes it makes life a lot easier. So I'll just top stitch between those marks an inch from the edge, or 2.5 centimetres from the edge on both sides. That, trim those up. And now at this point I think we're all due for a well-earned tea break. Only a little tea break today, as it's not a huge project. I hope you're enjoying making it along with me. I'm thinking mini iced rings would be the perfect accompaniment for a mighty mini tea break, and maybe a mini bone for my hairy friend. Bilbo! Bilbo, do you want a biscuit? Oh, he's a good boy, isn't he? He only takes his own biscuits. Okay, tea break over. It's now time to join our side seams. So I'm going to flip this so it's right sides together, but I want right sides of the outer together and right sides of the lining together, as you can see. So I have you flap upwards now into the body of the lining, just so it evens out the thickness. We're not stitching over it, it's just to keep it out of the way. So line up the long edges, ensure that the notches at the bottom are lined up on each side, and your seams in the centre, and those seams in the centre are really important to line up, because that you're going to see those at the top of your bag. So line those up to start and push the seam allowances towards the lining. So sometimes it's worth putting a pin through just to make sure you've got those absolutely aligned, because that's the most obvious part. kind of work your way out from there, and then I'm going to clip one side. And the other. And then I'm going to stitch that with a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'll do the other side. Make sure my seam allowances are towards the lining. There we are. You can have a peek inside just to make sure those seams are lined up at the top edge nicely. You can always change them if they're not. Get the seam ripper out. Hopefully they're matching perfectly. And then I'm going to stitch the other side seam exactly the same way. Get my pin back. Line those seams up at the top of the bag and push the seam allowances to the lining side. And you can see now this is why we didn't top stitch right to the end, because we wouldn't be able to get right to the edge otherwise. There we go, I've got my pin in so I know I'm lined up. Clip the rest. Do a double check. Yep, and then we're going to stitch the second side, but we're going to leave a turning gap on the lining, and I'm going to leave a gap of approximately 12.5 centimetres or 5 inches on this side. So I'll draw that in just so I remember, because I'm very good at forgetting. You want to make sure that you've got a little bit sewn at the bottom and a little bit sewn at the top, basically. Okay, so stitch that. And just for information, you'll see that that bottom corner there, you're just left with a fraction of a corner cut out after the seam. So it's about 0.5 centimetre, which equates in inches to 3/16, I think, but it's tiny. So I'm now going to just trim those seams where lining meets outer. And I want to lose a bit of bulk there. The more you can get rid of safely, the better. Same on the other side. I can take this off now. And then I'm going to head to the ironing board and just press that seam open at the turning gap, which will help us at the end make a nice crisp closure. So onto the fun bit, boxing the corners, and using a mat can really help because the grid lines can help keep everything in place. So here we go, nicely pressed. So I'm going to lay it on a cutting mat, which really helps to align everything. And now, to ensure all 4 corners are even and your bag corners are perfectly aligned, with the bag still inside out, roll your unit into a tube. So the side seams are sitting on top of each other and the corner points are sitting on top of each other. You might have to fight with your back spine a little bit. Keep the flap pushed into the lining side so it makes things more of an even thickness. And just peer in, make sure your side seams are over side seams. Points are over points. I'm going to stand up, I think. Add it to your cutting mat and make sure you're aligned. I've got to find a central line. This badge isn't helping. So we want to make sure that the points are the same length. So same distance here. Your corners are on top of each other, but those points should be in the same alignment as well. Same at both ends. A little extra check to make sure you're square is if you fold back one of these points, this should be a square, an absolute square. So that's looking fine. Let's look at this side. It's harder with the badge on there to make sure we've got these angles perfectly aligned. You might have to do a little bit of fandangling. Just open it up and take a look. And when that point is folded back, it should lie directly on top of the side seam again. So lots of little things to check just to make sure you've got a nice even corner. I think we're all right there. Just going to clip that in place for a sec. Now we can box the corners. Now if your corners are looking fine and you can see your little notches that were there before, you can just box those corners with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. But if somewhere along the way you have lost your corners or they're not aligning totally correctly, then we can just measure them to make sure. So I'm going to trim off the seam allowance just at the bottom there so I can see where my point is exactly. And we want this box corner to be 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres in length, and that means the actual stitch line needs to be 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. So to do that, grab a ruler, lay your bag on your cutting mat so you can see it's beautifully aligned. So your seam should be running directly down a line on your cutting mat, and then add your ruler to the top. I might have to move these for now. And we want a 1 inch line, so where 1 inch bisects that corner. So just move your ruler so you've got a 1 inch seam line, and then draw that on. And then we can just stitch that. I'll flip it over, so we've got one there. Flip it over. Do the same on the other side. Where your 1 inch bisects. Make sure you're fully in line. I shouldn't have put those back on, should I? So there we go, there's my 1 inch. So we're making sure that the ruler is in line with the lines on the grid as well, so we're perpendicular with everything. Okay, so I can sew those two now. But I'll mark the lines on the other side before I do that. So again, as I say, you can just do a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance on the top if you can see your seam allowances fully, but if they're not aligned, then do them manually. Mark them on just so you know you're definitely going to be the right size. It does take a little bit of faffing, but it's fine. So 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. Make sure my rule is lined up with the board. And the other side, flip. Everything in line. Doesn't help having a huge long badge. Nope. Make sure I'm straight on my board. One inch. There we go, and I can stitch those now. So I'll stitch each of those 4 corners separately, just across that line I've drawn. Tidy up first. trim off. Okay, so that's the main part of your bag done. Let's turn it through and have a look. So take it slowly, pull your flap out first. Put the hand inside. As long as you've got a small hand, you'll get it in there. There we are. Put the corners out with your fingers. Lining in. Right, then let's go and give that a good press. So there's our bag nicely pressed. It's looking pretty good. Very cute. So now it's time to add the second half of our closure. So I'm adding the magnetic clasp today. If you're using the twist lock, this is the point we'll apply it to, and you'll apply both sides of the twist lock at this point. See the written instructions for that option, but obviously, as I say, we're just doing a magnetic snap today. So here's the second half of my magnetic snap. So to mark the position for the female part of your magnetic clasp, fold down your flap into its final position. Now, it is a lot easier if you pad the bag out. Here's a nappy. Do you know what? These nappies are so handy. Disposable nappies, I must say. They're so handy for padding out small bags. So just fold your flap down and see where it falls naturally. So we want to see where the nipple of the male part falls onto the body of your bag. So you want it so you're not squeezing the bag closed at the top. You need a little play in it. But see where that nipple falls, and it should be in the middle of that Decaville strip somewhere. So we're about there. Let me check that's around about the middle. It's looking pretty good. Yep. I'll take my nappy out again. I'll apply my washer. Make my marks. Seam ripper, and remember to pull your lining out before you do this, because we only want it going through the outer of the bag. There we go. And female half on. Push the washer inside. And push the prongs out or in, whichever you prefer. There we go. And now we want to close the bag while we're here. Obviously that Decaville that you've built into the bag in there helps stabilise that clasp, so you don't need anything on the back of it. So let's close the lining. So with the lining remaining pulled out, and your raw edges folded in at that seam allowance. Make sure there's no threads hanging out. Pin or clip along it. Make sure it's neatly matched, no raw edges poking out. And then I'm going to stitch 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge just to close that turning gap. So a final trim up. You can always press that lining again while it's out. It's easier to press while it's outside the bag. And then we can push that back inside and have a look at it. To help press the bag, you can just put a bit of rolled up towel in there, or a flannel, or even a tailor's ham if you've got one. There we are. That's our bag nearly complete, and we're ready for the straps. So there we are, beautifully pressed, and we're nearly finished. It's time to make the strap. So there's lots of different instructions in the document for different types of straps. Choose to make your own, use webbing, fixed, removable, and even a rivet on option. On my bag today, I'm just going to choose the fixed adjustable strap, which is actually my favourite one for this bag. So I'm going to need a 3/4 inch rectangle ring and a 3/4 inch tri-glide. I'm going to cut a 65 inch or 165 centimetre length of 3/4 inch webbing. So couldn't quite decide which of these to choose, but I think I'm going to go with the pink. It's quite nice though. No, I'll go with the pink. So a 65 inch length. It's funny how sometimes we use centimetres and sometimes we use inches, isn't it? Is my tape measure long enough? No, 50. Plus 15, there we go, 65 inch. Bear in mind, by the way, that if you're making this bag for yourself, you don't even need to make the strap adjustable. You can just make it to the length that's right for you and save on the hardware completely. Anyway, I'm making this one adjustable, so thread your tri-glide first of all onto the strap over the bar. It's a fiddly one. Put that to one side. There we go, I've just threaded it on. I want to pull about 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches through. Nothing too specific. Just enough so you can fold it over and fold it back on itself and leave a little bit of room to get your machine foot in there as well. You don't want to get it too close because it makes it awkward. So I've folded that raw edge underneath, and I'm going to sew either 2 lines of stitching or a box onto there just to hold it in place. Putting a clip in it for a second. If you do want to get really close to the rectangle ring, you can use a zipper foot on your machine. Trim up. And then we're going to take our rectangle ring and thread it onto the loose end. So it's just hanging there. And then take the loose end again, bring it round in a circle, make sure it's not twisted anywhere, and thread that loose end back over the top of the tri-glide and back down again. So you can pull most of the webbing through there, so you are just left with a loop with your rectangle ring on. Okay. And then we're going to bring the loose end round again back to the rectangle ring. So we're actually making a complete loop with this. So back to your rectangle ring, back through, pull 1.5 inches or 4 centimetres or so through again, double it over and back on itself just to enclose the raw edge. Put a bit more there. Need a bit more there. There we are. And then clip that, and I can sew 2 lines of stitching or a box shape on there again. So we are making a complete loop, so just make sure it's not twisted anywhere before you stitch it. Trim any threads again. So as I say, you've made a complete loop. It does sound a bit strange, this one, but we're attaching it directly to the bag rather than to any carriers on the side. So that's your strap completed, and it's adjustable. So now we've just got to attach that to the bag. So grab your bag and open the flap. And I'm going to lay the strap onto the bag, onto the flap. So I'm going to put my, get it the right way around, rectangle ring on this side of the bag because I want that towards my back when I wear it. So you can choose which side to put it on according to which way you wear your bags. I'm going to lay the completed strap onto the underside of the bag flap, approximately 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch above where the main body sits. I'm going to grab a piece of double-sided tape just to help me with this. You can have this rectangle ring as far away from the flap as you want. You might want it close in, you might want it far up. I quite like it about 10 centimetres away, so it's just around my back, so it's not quite visible on the bag when you're wearing it to the front. So to get an idea where I want it to fall, I'm going to close the bag. So it's about 1 centimetre up from the top of the bag, but you see if you hold it up by the straps, that'll give you an exact position. So just hold it there, open it again. See where it is. Yeah, let's measure that. That is exactly 1 centimetre anyway. Right, so I'll just add a piece of double-sided tape in there just to hold it in place. Next thing's a lot simpler. So there's my double-sided tape. I'm going to lay my strap on, so that's about 10 centimetres, 4 inches away from the rectangle ring, about 1 centimetre up from the bag top. So I've stuck that on there just so you can see. So there's my rectangle ring. Make sure your tri-glide is on the outside. You don't want it underneath, you want it on the top. So just fasten it, make sure they're in the right place, hold it up. Yeah, that looks absolutely fine. I'll put a couple of clips in while I stitch it, just to make sure it doesn't shift anywhere. And then I'm going to stitch a box shape on there, on that webbing within the flap, just to secure it in place. I'm going to pull all my threads out rather than doing a lock stitch there, because I don't want any loops on the outside. And then just trim that up. I've got a loop there. Spend some time making sure it's nice and tidy. Got them. Got them. And there we are, there's the box shape on the flap. Now you can also put a couple of rivets in there if you'd like to, and that's ready to close up. Your bag is complete. Hope you love it. Adjust your strap to the required length, drop in your phone and a couple of credit cards, and away you go. If you want to size this pattern up or down to meet your own needs, you can do that really easily. Just take a look at my instructional video on how to resize any pattern, and the link is in the instruction document, and I'll also try and remember to add in here somewhere too. If you need help with this or any other of my patterns, or to just grab some free projects, do join my Facebook group and I'll add the link in below. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Now you've made one, why not try making another in a different fabric, with a different strap or clasp, or adding your own decoration? What are you waiting for? Go sew!